Okay, the show is underway. Welcome in, everybody. This is The Slate. If you don't know already, we are a DraftKings program. We come to you live in that 5 o'clock Eastern hour, 5:20 at the moment. Brendan Glasheen, Matt LaMarca. We'll take you up until 6 o'clock tonight and get you set for Divisional Round Weekend. Yep, it's a football Friday. It's been football all week. It's a football time of year. If you've got anything else you want to talk about, I mean, we'll take it. I mean, if LaMarca's got NBA angles for tonight, sure. But we're going to be focused on the 4 divisional round games coming your way this weekend. LaMarca's in his bunkered down location. I come to you from my remote hotel location that I will not share. I've learned so much in the remote world since those days have started, not to share where I am. So I'm good. I'm mature at that point in my life. Kind of. LaMarca, what do you say we just go right in order just to keep it easy? Because I think like when people consume, maybe next week this isn't the case, but when folks are consuming Super Wildcard Weekend this weekend, their focus of the games is the order they're going in. Whereas next week we're going to only have 2 games you can pick apart. This conference, that conference. It's really like a conference division discussion during the season. But with this time of year, folks are like, okay, what's on first? What's on second? And so on and so forth. Jaguars, Chiefs. And we've got the DraftKings Sportsbook pulled up as well. Of course, odds for the show brought to you by the DraftKings Sportsbook. We've got the DFS slate up if necessary. So if you have questions there for LaMarca, don't ask me. I'll try to contribute something here. But LaMarca, looking at Jacksonville, Kansas City, line has moved to 9. We talked about this game on Tuesday when Garion was here. A lot of dollars, bet percentage coming in on the Jags, but the line's not moving that much, as we talked about. Some teaser protection being built in on the Chiefs. You were doubting just because the dollars were coming in that that line was going to move to 7.5. Potentially, because folks, in a teaser or a 6 or 7 point teaser, you could bring the Chiefs down and take them just to win the game, right? -0.5 point, you win them on the money line. In this case, a 6-point teaser, you're taking the Chiefs at -3. So that key number of 3. What are your latest thoughts on Chiefs Jaguars?
Yeah, so the whole week is honestly a bit odd because it's definitely shaping up to be a sharps and squares kind of week, but it's a reverse one. Normally the public is the guys that are taking the favorites. They want to lay the points with the good teams, and the sharps are taking the underdogs because usually the favorites are a little bit inflated. That is not the case this week. The underdog is the public team in 3 of the 4 contests, including this one.
Yeah,
people really like this Jaguars team. They came back from the death against the Chargers, down 27-0 at halftime. People are really buying into this squad. There are some trends in the Jaguars' favor as well, specifically teams that are big favorites in the playoffs coming off of a bye are 15-25 against the spread, roughly, laying more than a touchdown. Mm-hmm. So it would not shock me if the Chiefs do not look like the Chiefs at the start of this game. That's kind of been their MO in general during the year, the playoffs. They kind of put themselves behind the 8 ball, and then they're so good that they can just come back and win. So what I'm looking at primarily in this game is I like the Jaguars on a first half bet, because I think that this game will stay competitive, at least in the first half. And I will potentially be looking to take the Chiefs live if they fall into a hole. So the one thing is that the sports books have caught on to this. And, let's say the Chiefs do fall behind 10-0, 14-0. You're still not going to get them at plus money, right? They're going to be favored still, despite being in a hole. But they have just such an insane track record of digging themselves out that I do think they ultimately win this game. It's probably going to be close to double digits, if not double digits. And I think eventually it's just going to be too much for Jacksonville to keep up. Their defense is no good. They were 30th in pass defense DVOA. Mahomes had over 300 passing yards and 4 touchdowns when these teams met in the regular season. So I think eventually the Chiefs' talent is going to shine through. But I do think that this game at least gets off to a little bit of a slower start.
If there is a team that Kansas City could play, or they could get off to a good start, it's because Jacksonville against superior opponents has not been very good in the first half themselves. See the game against Baltimore, which I thought that Baltimore game when they came back and won. Now that's a whole nother story. The Ravens being horrible in the second half. The Chargers were another bad, they've been a bad second half team since their existence, really, going back to San Diego, never mind this season. But since Justin Herbert arrived, Justin Herbert's one of the worst quarterbacks to the second half number maybe ever. I mean, it's bad. And we saw that come to fruition on Saturday night. But if there is a team Kansas City could get off to a good start against, it would be this team, because Jacksonville horses around themselves. Dallas built a big lead in the first half. They came back and won that game, the Jaguars. So how would you respond to that?
I just think I'm taking what I've seen from the Chiefs. I'm adding in the fact that I think that the bye, ultimately, obviously the bye is a good thing. You get some rest, much needed rest for a long NFL season, but it would not shock me if they had to just kick a little bit of rust off after taking a week off.
Fair enough. Andy Reid is phenomenal against the spread off a bye, regular season, playoffs, more specifically as of late. Now, there is that trend out there. We've talked about this throughout the season. Patrick Mahomes, when he's a 3-point favorite or greater, I think it's 3.5 or greater, so more than a field goal, under 500 significantly against the spread, shorter than 3 or an underdog. Mahomes as a favorite or an underdog is does quite well in these spots. So I don't have much to argue. Now, can Kansas City, I feel Kansas City might be its healthiest to this point in the season defensively. They're no longer, we talk so much about how they evolved this season offensively without Tyreek Hill, number 1 offense in the NFL with Tyreek Hill gone. And Hill put up his numbers in Miami, we know. But their defense, too, I think might be flying under the radar, because, and rightfully so. Folks were so dialed in on what they would look like on offense without Hill and with Juju Smith-Schuster, and when they drafted Sky Moore, and then they brought in Jerick McKinnon. Their tight ends after Kelsey have been good. Mecole Hardman. What do you think about the KC defense? I think that they're a pretty solid unit. They're not getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of gone from, bad to, they were even historically bad at some points during this Mahomes run, to now they are average. And when you combine an average defense,
which could be enough for them.
Exactly. An average defense with the best offensive in football. And, the Chiefs were first in points per game, first in yards per game. You can win a lot of games with that kind of offense and an average defense.
Sure. I would agree. Yes, some historically bad. I think the year that they were really, really bad when they played Tampa, Brady's first year, we saw what the Bucs did to that defense. Now, Tampa's defense, I think, was really the story of that game, the way the Tampa defense played. But Brady and the offense at that point in time, they were cooking. So let's go to Giants, Eagles. Essentially, we're going to probably spend 10 minutes on each game. Works out well with the timing. So 10 minutes in, let's go to Giants, Eagles. Eagles are laying 7.5. It's the lowest. No, it is the shortest, second lowest total on the slate at 48. Kind of like the Jags, the Giants fit that criteria in the sense that they're coming off a game in which they were a dog in the wild card round, won outright. Here they are, underdogs by more than a touchdown. Folks are buying in on what Daniel Jones looked like, but I kind of see what you're getting at here. Like, don't we have to remember, if we're going to call out the Vikings for being a fraudulent team for most of the year, we can't read too much into Daniel Jones slicing up that defense. So what do you think of the Giants as 7.5-point underdogs, Eagles off a bye?
Yeah, and the Giants are just a very tough team for me to figure out, because they have just played so far and above their talent level all season. Mm-hmm. And, now there's talk about Daniel Jones getting the absolute bag this offseason from someone. Meanwhile, the Giants literally declined his 5th-year option, right? Like, so what a turnaround it has been for him. And, the coaching staff obviously gets a ton of credit. Brian Daboll, I think, is now the favorite to win coach of the year. So ultimately, this game for me comes down to how healthy is Jalen Hurts. And it's a question that, unfortunately, I don't think we're really going to know the answer of until the game starts.
Yep.
He's not on the injury report. He did have another week off last week. You would think that would certainly help. But I also don't think that the Eagles would just come flat out and tell us if Jalen Hurts was still struggling with the shoulder injury. So what I do know is that when Hurts did return to the lineup in week 18 against this same Giants team, he did not look like himself. He had 5.26 adjusted yards per attempt, which was his worst mark as a passer for the entire year. And he had just 13 rushing yards on 9 carries. So he was inefficient as a passer and a runner. I don't know if that was just a one-game fluke. We'll see, because the first time that Jalen Hurts faced the Giants, he destroyed them. The Eagles put up 48 points in that contest, and they ran all over him. They threw all over him. They did literally whatever they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we get a healthy Jalen Hurts, this game has the most blowout potential of the week, in my opinion. This is another one where, like you said, the squares, the public definitely like the Eagles. They love Brian Daboll. The Giants are now 14-4 against the spread this season. So it's a spot where the public is taking the points, but there has been some sharp activity on the Eagles at -7.5. If the Eagles play to their full potential, the Giants simply cannot keep up with them.
When they met, so not week 18, but when they met earlier in the year at the Meadowlands, you look at the first half, the Eagles got off to a fantastic start, which they've done that pretty much all year. They had another game against Tennessee when A.J. Brown went off against his old team and they fired their GM. Eagles often start fast. Now that, again, relies on the health and progression of Jalen Hurts, who did admit, if I remember correctly, after that game, the second Giants game before the bye, he basically said, thank goodness we have a bye, because he kind of admitted he didn't feel great. So, and then coming off the injury report is a good note. But in that game, the Giants started horribly. They punted on their first 4 possessions. Eagles scored touchdowns on their first 3 possessions. For teams 6 through 23 are just kind of all the same. And that's where I feel like the Chargers and the Vikings were. And those teams, as we found out, in spurts, they're great, but the Chargers got exposed in the second half. The Vikings got exposed by the Giants, and the Giants hung in there in 2 matchups previously. I kind of agree. This divisional round weekend might be what we had expected and what we saw in last year's wild card weekend, where maybe the blowouts do play out, but who's to say? The Giants, some notes, the public trends, I think the folks are currently getting wave of. Daniel Jones in his career is 17-5 against the spread as a road underdog. Let's see. Unders have been great for the Giants. I know you mentioned the 14-4 against the number. In most of those cases, 14-4 this season, the Giants, in most of those cases as an underdog. In this case, they are a 7.5 point underdog. So, okay. Yeah, sheesh. Yeah, the Giants, the Giants more than the Jags. The Giants feel like a team like maybe that Daboll is that good to keep them hanging around. And that's why you mentioned off the top, this is a difficult one to pick apart. If you believe in the Giants, you're getting, I don't know, I'm getting feels of like Giants 2011 kind of Giants, the 07 Giants. I'm getting, now their roster's not as good. You're absolutely right. I know you're right. That's disrespectful to those teams. But like You got a quarterback that no one really knows what to think of, Daniel Jones. Now, Eli, of course, proved himself and won 2 titles. I understand that. But going before Eli won the titles, you're like, oh, okay, this guy shoots up every week. He takes the hits. And then you've got a star player, OBJ. In this case, it's Saquon. And then just a bunch of no names at wide receiver. Hodgins has come out of nowhere.
I like it.
Bellinger, the tight end, had a nice day last week. Now, Darius Slayton's been sort of phased out. Richie James, outside of his fumble, he played well against the Vikings. So,
yeah, I mean, the big difference being obviously on the defensive side of the ball.
Yes,
those Giants teams were really, really good, and this Giants team is really, really bad. So, I will say, like, the one thing that is making me a little bit, shy about pulling the trigger on the Eagles is that this is a divisional game with a large spread. And as we saw last week, divisional playoff games with big spreads are just very good spots to typically target underdogs. The Ravens and Dolphins both covered in that scenario, despite not having their starting quarterbacks. So if you do like the Giants, that I think is your one glimmer of hope. That and the Jalen Hurts thing. But again, if the Eagles play like the Eagles have played for most of the year, I don't think this one's going to be very competitive.
You could compare this divisional matchup to what the Niners did to Seattle. Now, credit to the Seahawks. They hung in there, had a lead at one point, but suspect defense, secondary that can be had in spots. Their quarterback was number 1 in completion percentage, but Geno had to make some big throws at the end and it come from behind game script and through the interception. They have a great running back. Kenneth Walker is coming onto the scene. So maybe you get a game script like that where it could be close. And then the Eagles, again, but it relies on the health of the quarterback, right? And, but who's to say? Brock Purdy's doing his thing right now for the Niners. We'll get to Brock Purdy, that guy. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to Buffalo. This to me, I think, is like everyone's looking for. This is the game of the weekend, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Cincinnati, Buffalo, the game that did not happen, of course, because of the circumstances in Cincinnati. This game is in Buffalo. The line makes sense when you consider Buffalo was a 2.5-point favorite, maybe closed at 2 as a 2-point favorite when they met week 17 Monday Night Football. Then you flip it because Buffalo's home.
Yep.
So you basically flip it by a touchdown. So instead of coming down, or no, pardon me, that you add 3 points for home field. So going from a 2.5-point favorite to what we saw earlier in the week, 4.5. I think it may have opened at 3.5 now that I think about it. But now it's at 5.5. And of course, the news of the day, offensive line for the Bengals. Williams out, Kappa out. We know La'el Collins was put on IR a few weeks ago. I know Joe Burrow got hit a ton last year, LaMarca, in the playoffs and overcame that and made a phenomenal run for Cincinnati to get to the Super Bowl. And this is also a Bengals team that probably shouldn't have won last week, if we're being honest.
Yep.
I don't know. Look, man, I know Garion said he's going to probably take the cheese and take the Bengals. I don't know what to think of this line. I don't like it. I don't like it.
It's a very tough game, in my opinion. There's a lot of things to consider. We talked a little bit about it on Tuesday, just how fortunate the Bengals have been recently. Obviously last week's game where they basically had a 14-point swing with that fumble recovery touchdown against the Ravens. A couple other results late in the year against the Buccaneers and the Patriots that really swung in their favor. So the Bengals' public perception is definitely sky high at the moment.
Yep.
That is concerning, and this is another spot where the Bengals right now are the heaviest bet team of the week. 67% of the bets are on the Bengals. But the Sharps are all over the Bills. They are looking at those offensive line injuries, plus the fact that Buffalo is just basically the unquestioned top team in football by most metrics. And they are happy to lay the points with this team at home. I don't know where I sit with this game because I don't like to go against the Sharps very often. But the Bengals' offensive line injuries, I think, might be a smidge overblown.
Okay.
Buffalo is not a team that gets after the quarterback very well, especially without Von Miller. I want to say that they were near the bottom 10 in terms of adjusted sack rate this year. And Miller was clearly their best pass rusher. So I don't know if they're the team to exploit those absences. Additionally, none of the guys that went down for the Bengals are really that good, right? Like, it's not like we're going from Trent Williams or Tyron Smith to a backup left tackle. Like, we're going from guys that were kind of average to below average to backups who are probably a little bit worse. So I don't know if that's really as big of a deal to me as it is to some other bettors out there. And what I look at with this game is I have the opportunity to get Joe Burrow plus 5.5 points. And that is a tough proposition for me to pass up. Since the start of last year, Burrow is 6-0 against the spread when getting more than a field goal. And we see that all the time from elite quarterbacks, right? Guys like Mahomes, you mentioned his ATS numbers. As a small favorite or underdog, he is basically an automatic bet every single time.
Yep.
I think, Burrow is still young. He is getting very close to that territory for me. For many years, it's just been a good strategy where if you can get an elite quarterback getting points, it's something you should heavily consider. And so I'm taking that into account with the Bengals. I hate being on the most public side of the week. I hate going against the Sharps, but the idea of getting Burrow plus this many points is just too tempting for me.
The Bengals have covered in 20 of their last 25 games. Joe Burrow personally 19-5 against the spread in his last 24. And then the other one that jumped out to me here, just a trend for you folks, the Bengals have covered 8 straight games as an underdog. It's just like, so yeah, you make a good point though. Like the Bills don't, especially with Miller, since Miller's been out, they're very much like a lot of good teams with good offenses. They're a bend don't break kind of defense, right? So yeah, I mean, from a game script perspective, I'm just trying to imagine it, right? And they retooled their offensive line. The Bengals did in the offseason, but they didn't make a big splash. They had nowhere to go but up, I think, in their revitalization of their O-line. So
and the thing with the Bills is they are so good at scoring the ball, but they are going to give you some opportunities, right? They were number 2 or 31, however you want to look at it, in the league in terms of percentage of drives that end with a turnover. They're going to turn the ball over. They did it last week against the Dolphins. They've done it all season, right?
That's what scares me about this guy, Josh Allen. He's a freak. He's excellent, very good player, talented as hell. They just know how to let teams wiggle back in. And I think it's play calling too. I mean, the play calling in that game against the Miami, they built a 10-point lead and 3 straight dropbacks, hucking it down the sideline. Like, can we implement a running game to a degree, please? I know he's part of that too, but they're almost, McDermott is all, and I'm not blaming it all on McDermott. Allen takes some blame too. Their offensive play calling too. They're just, what I think is going to do this team in is they're too Josh Allen dependent. And that's not always a bad thing. I realize that, but it could allow a team like Cincinnati to hang around and beat them.
Yeah, I do like that they've gotten James Cook more involved in recent weeks.
Yep.
If we want to talk prop bets, I know you mentioned to me before we started that you're on the Devin Singletary under. I'm on the James Cook over. It's a very similar bet. There's good correlation between the two. But James Cook has now led this team in carries 2 weeks in a row. He had 12 attempts last week. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry this season. And the number is only 39.5 yards. If he gets to, double digit carries, which I think is very reasonable to expect at this point, I really like his chances of hitting the over on 39.5. He basically just needs to average 4 yards a carry, and he was close to 6 during the regular season.
So the elephant in the room is, what do you do with Josh Allen's number? 47.5. Now he went significantly under last week against the Dolphins. But if you look at Josh Allen the last year, 2 years against competition that has a reputable passing game, or just playoff teams. Now that's a finicky track record way to look at it, because of course at this point now we have 8 teams remaining. But I'm talking during the season when he faces a playoff team. In that moment, Allen's rushing yards skyrocket. Now he didn't use his legs much last week in a game script where I felt, Buffalo's trailing. I took Josh Allen's under at 50.5 last week. I'm more interested now in his over at 47.5. This opened at 40. This total 40.5. It's up to 47.5. Are you envisioning it's going to be an Allen Cook backfield this week?
Yeah, I mean Singletary's going to have a role too. He and Cook split it basically 50-50 last week in terms of snaps.
Yep.
But Singletary's more of the pass catching option. Cook's going to get a slight edge in terms of carries. And Allen, of course, is going to get his touches too. It's not a particularly good matchup for rushing for a quarterback. The Bengals allowed the 5th fewest rushing yards to opposing QBs this season, but with Allen, it really just comes down to his mentality. And I do agree. I think in big games, he's going to be more apt to use his legs. I feel the same way about Patrick Mahomes, by the way. I'm on Patrick Mahomes' rushing yards over this week, which I think is around 24.5, maybe 23.5, something like that. But it's a very similar thing, right? Like Mahomes averages for his career roughly 10 additional rushing yards per game in the playoffs, just because he's more willing to put it on the line in a game where if you lose, you go home. So I think that, the same kind of logic applies to Allen, and we obviously know he's a more willing runner to begin with.
Right. And I think at this point in the year, especially, never mind the playoff examples during the season, teams that are in the playoffs at that moment when he faces them, you also kind of preserve some extra juice. Like, okay, I'll give myself up here, take off. And, you're more willing to get hit. You're more willing to get hit as a runner at this point in the year. You do what it takes, right? To get first downs, move the chains, keep your offense on the field, win the game primarily. So yeah, he's Mahomes is at 24.5 as of right now.
Yeah, I give that one a slight edge compared to Allen, just because I think it's significantly lower.
Right.
And I did the math on it. Mahomes for his career is averaging right around 33 rushing yards per game during the playoffs. So I think that's a good number. I like that one a little bit more than Allen, but it's the same kind of logic for both plays.
Let me ask you this then. If you're not, because you're teetering, you're like, I fade the sharps. Is there an angle on the game though? And you're big on Buffalo. You've been on Buffalo for most of the year, all year, really. You've been high on the Bills. If I remember correctly, one of the first shows we did, I mean, I admit I took the Rams as a dog opening night. Smarty pants people were on the Bills as a road favorite at the reigning champs, and the Bills stampeded the Rams. Now we found out the Rams weren't all that good. Now, but that was the healthiest they would have been all year. Well, maybe not Stafford. Stafford was coming off an injury during camp. Anyway, is there an angle though on DraftKings Sportsbook that you might look at it and go, okay, hey, I don't have to lay 5.5. This is my angle to play Buffalo team total, possibly.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't really have a huge Buffalo play. I mean, I have plenty of Buffalo Super Bowl futures.
Yep.
So I don't necessarily need any more exposure to them. I think if I was going to look at a bet, I do like the Bengals. I am, I know I was kind of wishy-washy there. I am on the Bengals. Just throwing, I want to put it out there. It's not something that I fully believe in with my heart, but it's a play that I have made. I also think you can look at the under on 49. I think that in these games, when you have two explosive offenses going up against each other, the MO is to just limit the number of big plays. So I think both of these teams are going to play a lot of two deep safety type looks. And it's going to result in a lot of long drives. And, if you can limit teams to field goals, if the Bills turn it over a time or two, which again feels like it will happen because it happens every week, Maybe Cincinnati, maybe the offensive line stuff matters more than I'm accounting for.
Yep.
And Cincinnati is constantly getting pressured. Like there are multiple ways that I can see this game going under.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up long sustained drives. That's the direction I felt we were going in when the game started, week 17 in Cincinnati. It was Bengals got a lead, right? Was it 7-0?
7-3. Yeah.
7-3. But it was a lot of Burrow kind of picking over the middle, with that deep coverage, just using the middle of the field or slant routes to the outside underneath the coverage. And even Allen was well on his way running the ball. I want to guess Josh Allen was approaching 20-ish rushing yards, and it was still early in the game, as we all know.
Yeah, the game that really stands out to me when you're talking about this is when the Bills played the Chiefs, and the total was like 55 points, and every person was like, man, how do these two teams not go for 70 plus in this game? And it was just a lot of, both teams ran the ball a lot into, soft fronts. And I think that's kind of where defenses are headed in the modern NFL. These passing games are so good that you kind of have to just try and take away as much of the deep stuff as you can and then hope to limit the other team to 3 points.
Buffalo ran the ball for 125 yards in the Kansas City game you're referencing. Josh Allen, he ran for 32 yards. Singletary had a good game, 85 yards. Yeah, but again, the key to that game too was, and both, I think Mahomes did too, they turned the ball over in the end zone. There were some twists and turns, no question, in that game. Allen did not have a pick in that game. I beg your pardon, he did not. But I want to guess he fumbled. Yeah, he did. He fumbled. Yes, Josh Allen had a fumble lost, and then Patrick Mahomes threw two picks. And Mecole Hardman, he fumbled, but he recovered it. Okay, never mind. So Allen had a lost fumble, and Mahomes threw two picks. Okay, you got about 6 minutes left. Let's dive into this. Now, this one, I feel like maybe I'm wrong. The sharp folks are on Dallas.
This is the exception to the rule. This is the game where the sharps are all over the underdog and the public is riding the Brock Purdy bandwagon.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Do you like San Fran or do you like Dallas?
No, Dallas is my favorite pick of the week.
Oh, okay.
I have been very impressed by what Brock Purdy has been able to do.
Yep.
But his job has been probably the easiest job in football. I mean, watching that game last week, there were a few of those throws that he made that I was like, man, I could have made that throw. You're talking about guys who were just wide open. And this will be his first real test as a quarterback.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at those. Look at some of those defenses he's played. Yep. Never mind as a starter, but just that San Fran. Really, if you go back and look, San Fran's now I know Seattle hung in there, had a lead, but you look back at their schedule now, holy cow. Their last legitimate game was probably Kansas City when they got steamrolled.
Yep. It's been a while. And that game wasn't fair because San Fran was down a whole bunch of starters in that one.
Yes, that's true. They're way healthier skill-wise with Debo, Mitchell, and their defense is healthy now too. That is a good point.
But I think if we're talking, like from a roster standpoint, the thing about the 49ers is that like the rest of their roster is so good that they have been able to survive with just anyone at quarterback. Well, anyone besides Trey Lance, who they traded 3 first-round picks for. If you were to pick the second best team in the league in terms of just overall roster talent, I think it might be the Cowboys, right? They have stars on defense. They have stars on offense, plenty of weapons, and they have a legitimate, maybe not top tier quarterback, but certainly a guy who is a proven above average starter in the NFL. And I think the fact that you can get 4 points with such a, mismatch potentially at the quarterback position, it's very tough for me to pass that up. Now maybe Brock Purdy really is like the next Tom Brady, but I'm going to need more than 6 games to make that statement. And certainly I'm going to need them to come against tougher competition than what he's faced. He's faced Seattle twice. He's faced the Raiders. He's faced the
Arizona.
Cardinals.
Yep.
He's faced the Commanders, and he's faced the Buccaneers. And the Bucs defense, as we saw last week, is not nearly the same unit that they were when they won the Super Bowl. So this is it for Brock, in my opinion. You want to make a statement? You're an NFL starting quarterback. This is your chance, buddy.
It's not even about Purdy, though, for being honest. This is about Shanahan. Like, Shanahan has a lot of Belichick in him, which makes sense. The family's close. Mm-hmm. Kyle Shanahan, I think, is getting giddy inside. Like, look, I can win with this guy. Like, that's how Bill was. Like, when they moved.
You know, it's been
Brady.
good because I haven't even heard. I don't remember hearing an update on Jimmy Garoppolo in the past month and a half.
That's right. And there was a chance he'd be ready for this weekend or championship weekend.
What they were saying, and nobody's even asking the question at this point.
Good question or good point, whatever you're trying to get at, Lamarca. I see where you're coming from. Purdy, passing yards, 236.5. How do you feel? Where is he at? 238.5. How do you feel about an under on Purdy passing yards?
So I like, can you scroll down just a smidge?
Sure.
Pass attempts, 30.5 on Brock Purdy. I like the under quite a bit.
Okay.
He's been at 30 passes or less in 5 of his last 6 games, or 5 of his only 6 games, I should say. Mm-hmm. And I think that the 49ers, as much as they are impressed with what he's done, I think they would be wise to try and limit his attempts against this pass rush. Right. San Fran's got a great offensive line. They can hold up pretty good against Micah Parsons and company, but Dallas has been weaker against the run than the pass all year. And, you know, every time you drop back is a chance for him to potentially make a mistake. So I think they're going to lean on Christian McCaffrey, on Deebo Samuel, Elijah Mitchell. I think that this is another spot where Purdy goes under.
Okay. I tend to agree. That feels safer. I mean, okay, let's get to the hard part. Well, this actually might be easier because we're not picking spreads. But all right, give us who's going to be in the championship games? Who's your final 4?
So I've got Eagles, Cowboys, and I have Chiefs, Bills.
Okay, Chiefs, Bills from Atlanta. We didn't even spend a minute on that. How about no surprise the league is considering changing conference championships to be at neutral sites now going forward. Who didn't see that coming?
How fast that thing sold out?
Oh, I hate it. Oh, it's such a college football thing. But that's what college is for. I want to be outdoors in the cold, and I want to see
taking away such an advantage with I think that I like the way that the NFL has done the playoffs now. Winning the top spot in your conference really means something.
I agree.
And by losing home field advantage in the most important game of the season, up until that point, it takes away from that a little bit.
It is classic NFL. This all stems from a tragic scene in Cincinnati, and now they have found a way to create revenue from it, and now they are going to consider this, which I hope it gets voted against. That's my.
Are they going to create is it additional revenue though? Because
well, right. Those teams miss out on ticket sales. Whoever hosts, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but they'll blow it up, make some big event. I mean, they don't think about it. I mean, they've never made Conference Championship Sunday a big event. It's the Super Bowl, right? But they have an opportunity to do that. With this, we'll see.
I mean, personally, I feel like we deserve that game. I won't complain too much if the Bengals get there. Don't get me wrong. I think the Bengals are a really good team in their own right. But after Chiefs Bills last year, I need the rematch in the playoffs. Just please, NFL, please, just give it to us.
Dallas is plus 165 on the money line right now at DraftKings. And you like Dallas to beat the Niners? And plus, that's another thing, too. You talk about deserve that game. We'll wrap on this. We'll finally see, in theory, assuming Hurts looks good this weekend, we're going to get Hurts, Prescott, both quarterbacks healthy for those two teams, which we did not see in the regular season. We saw Cooper Rush.
We got a ways to go before we get that game, but that would be another nice one, too.
Right. Not as high caliber as those other two teams in the AFC, which I think everyone's been saying that all year. I think that's fair. But with, Dallas Dallas had Cooper Rush when they met early in the season. And that second meeting was Minshew, who looked good early. And then Dallas rallied at home. Okay, that's it. We got to go. For Matt LaMarca and Eamon, Daniel, behind the scenes, you all have a fantastic weekend. LaMarca, great stuff as always. We broke down 4 games in 40 minutes. Easy peasy.
It's the best week of the year, Glash. This is my favorite slate of games of the year, and I'm excited for each and every one of them.
Hard as bleep to cap them, I'm sure, but yeah, that's what makes it fun. It's going to be dramatic, and I hope all the games are good. We got spoiled last weekend.
Just keep Tony Dungy away from my broadcasts, please.
Yeah, I mean, talk about falling asleep. My God. Anywho, we're out of time. You all have a great weekend. Weekend programming. We do have the Sweat this weekend. Eamon, if you could share that info with me, please. I don't recall what the plan is for the Sweat this weekend as far as programming with games on Saturday and Sunday. But yes, the Sweat will be, of course, here on Monday. Our show is Monday through Friday.
I made my first Sweat appearance in nearly 2 years today.
Oh, yeah, your Hall of Fame thing. How'd that go?
I really enjoyed it. I am one of those people that take the Hall of Fame way too seriously, probably more seriously than the people who are actually in charge of the Hall of Fame. So I was happy to get to submit a hypothetical ballot and defend my case.
Were you on with Bukes?
No, Garion, actually. Oh. And we had 3 players overlap. We both had A-Rod, Scott Rowland, and Billy Wagner. He had Manny Ramirez and Gary Sheffield on his ballot. I did not. I had Carlos Beltran, Todd Helton, and Andrew Jones on my ballot, which he did not.
Okay. Here we go. We have the Sweat coming to you on Sunday, 11 a.m. There you go. So all the coverage during the week was for tomorrow. So good luck tomorrow. And then there's programming on Sunday ahead of Bengals, Bills, and Niners, Cowboys. There you go. All right. See you later. Bye, LaMarca.